Do you still think Chicago is called the Windy City because it's a windy city? Aw, that's cute. Well, if you don't want Chicago ruined for you, like I ruined New York, I wouldn't keep watching.
All right, let's see it. And the fit for today is the Frank Miller Ben Grimm.
Let's first do a quick recap on who the Statue of Liberty actually is and why it's called the Big Apple.
So the Statue of Liberty was designed by a French man named Frédéric Auguste de Bartholdi, and he based his design on an earlier design that he proposed for a statue in the Suez Canal called Egypt Brings Progress to the World. And for that design, he took his inspiration from Muslim peasant women in Egypt, the Fellah. And so here's the original design for that statue, which never came to pass. But later, when he was commissioned for the Statue of Liberty, he used that design as his inspiration, and he created a clay statue of it, and from there began to incorporate features of liberty as this goddess, and that was based on earlier designs from earlier in the 19th century, mainly by American sculptors and artists. And so it's basically a merging of this Muslim peasant woman design with features of the goddess Victory. Now, New York took on the nickname the Big Apple mainly after the 1920s when it began to be used in some horse racing newspapers, but it probably originates in this 1909 book, which uses this metaphor for the big cities of the United States as fruit of this tree. And here on this page in the middle of the highlighted portion, we see this statement: New York is merely one of the fruits of that great tree whose roots go down in the Mississippi Valley and whose branches spread from one ocean to the other. But the tree has no great degree of affection for its fruit. It inclines to think that the Big Apple gets a disproportionate share of the national sap.
You see, a funny thing happens when you wake up to the lies of the world. You start seeing things that are right there in plain sight. Things like this painting of Lucifer that was done in 1797.
So that painting is called Satan Summoning His Forces. That was done by Thomas Lawrence, and it was inspired by Milton's Paradise Lost. And it has absolutely no relationship whatsoever to the design of the Statue of Liberty. If you look at the full image, you can see that Satan is holding up both of his arms, not wearing much at all. The only resemblance to the Statue of Liberty is large eyes, a heavy brow, and a Greek nose. So it just reminds this creator of the Statue of Liberty. And there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. We can go back to earlier designs of this painting. We can look at the history of the design and the building of the Statue of Liberty, and there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. And the painting isn't even named after Lucifer. It's named after Satan.
And how he was often depicted standing in a very familiar pose.
So that's not even a painting of Lucifer. That's just an angel painted by an artist named P.J. Lynch, and that comes from this blog post where that artist explains that he was a part of a studio and there were other illustrators and they decided to produce a self-promotional calendar, and so this painting was done in response to the simple brief light that they had set for themselves. And later on, when he found the print in his studio and cleaned it up a little bit, he began to contemplate how Lucifer, the light carrier, came to be one of the names associated with the devil. And he concludes, I was playing about a bit with preconceptions about light and dark, good and evil, and even male and female in the image of an angel.
So familiar that it can't just be coincidental.
There are no relationships that require a coincidence, because this creator is misunderstanding and making stuff up and then drawing imaginary lines to connect imaginary dots.
So familiar that you ask yourself, how did I not see this before?
Well, mainly it's the capacity for critical thought, but the absence of investment in a jejune conspiratorial worldview is pretty helpful as well.
And then you take a closer look and you ask yourself, is that really even a woman's face?
Yep.
Because it looks an awful lot like the Lucifer painting's face.
No, it doesn't.
And then you realize that Lucifer was Satan in that Garden of Eden and offered Eve that infamous apple. And then that makes you think, New York, what is it often called? It's referred to as the Big Apple.
So the serpent in the Garden of Eden is not identified with Satan until after the Bible. Lucifer is not identified with Satan until after the Bible. And so obviously Lucifer is not identified with the serpent in the Garden of Eden until after the Bible. And additionally, there's no reference to any apple of any kind. There's just a generic reference to fruit. And the reason that people think of it as an apple is because a long time ago in English, the word apple was a more generic reference to any kind of fruit. And so in some translations, they used apple as a generic reference to a fruit, and now people confuse it for apple. And New York City's nickname, the Big Apple, has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with any of this.
Now, is that just a coincidence that they have a giant statue of Satan who offered Eve the apple, and they call New York the Big Apple?
Again, there are no relationships that need to be identified as coincidental, because this is all imaginary lines connecting imaginary dots that were ginned up based on misunderstanding, based on imagination, and based on a belligerent refusal to do any research at all.
You see, Chicago's no different. They have their own light bearer, and not only does their light bearer bear the light, but he also bears the fruit.
That is also not Satan, that is also not a light bearer, and that is not fruit. That is the Statue of the Republic. The original version was designed by Daniel Chester French for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, which took place in Chicago. And that is supposed to be a goddess that represents the Republic. And in her right hand, she holds up a globe with an eagle perched on top. And in the left hand, there is this staff that has a Phrygian cap on top, and that is inscribed with the word liberty. Now, the model for this statue was a woman named Edith Stokes. This is very much a woman being represented here, and specifically the goddess of the Republic. It has absolutely no relationship whatsoever to anything at all related to Lucifer or Satan. This creator just has a very misguided but fertile imagination.
And real Chicagoans know it's not called the Windy City because of the bitterly cold wind, but because the politicians here in Chicago were full of hot air.
That explanation is entirely made up. No such editor ever said any such thing in 1893. The first city to be called the Windy City was Green Bay in 1856, but in 1876, in their rivalry between Cincinnati and Chicago, we have a number of references to Chicago as the Windy City, which is supposed to combine both the windiness, and one of the first references is actually an article about a tornado that hit Chicago, as well as the reputation of people in Chicago for being braggarts.
So again, you can go on believing what the mainstream narrative says, or you can seek truth, because it's there. You just need to look and want to find it.
Yes, wanting to believe idiotic conspiracy theories is one of the two main ingredients of believing idiotic conspiracy theories. And the other ingredient is making sure you don't do any research at all, because that might undermine your idiotic conspiracy theories.